Well, this is still an experiment for me, so I'm going to try to do a YouTube a live midweek update, and I'm still not sure how I go about if I'm getting everything correct. So please bear with me as I try this out. So hopefully this will save me a little bit of time in putting these together. So I'm just going to discuss a few topics today. Maybe a little bit of preview of what I'll be talking about on Sunday and a little bit longer update. But just want to remind you, you can always get things at our YouTube channel, Fellowship Bible Chapel, rtntv.org. There's also an app for RTNTV, and that will be under, you'll have to just search for under my name. Then Rumble, and it's Real FBC on Rumble. We also do Brighteon, but we've been having some people on vacation, so we haven't been uploading to Brighteon the last couple weeks. So Real FBC on Rumble, though, and also try to get this one on over there. Also, just a reminder, I did do a hour show on Q90 FM in Green Bay, Wisconsin, with David Fiorazo on Stand Up for the Truth on Tuesday. And if you go to the standupforthetruth.com webpage, click on podcast, you can listen to that there. And we talked a lot about a lot of subjects, and it was kind of a trying to get as much in. That's what we do sometimes. So anyway, so let's look at some of the things that are going on. And so here's one of the interesting things that happened. I'm sure a lot of you have heard. It's been all over my social media pages. Everybody's sharing it. Just thought I'd make a couple comments on it about the Georgia Guidestones. Now, the Georgia Guidestones were put up. There's some controversy as to who actually put up the Guidestones, but they were erected back in 1979 in northern Georgia, about 100 miles north of Atlanta, near the South Carolina border. There was a man, I believe his name was Christian or Christensen, who was pretty much attributed to having erected these. And the purpose of them has always been kind of mysterious. It's called America's Stonehenge. The guy that put them up, if it was this guy, was a transhumanist. And they have sort of like the 10 Commandments, and they're in a bunch of different languages, and they are tied to the sun and that type of thing to show the date and that sort of thing. And there's about 7 languages. And you can visit it. There's about 20,000 people a year have been visiting this thing. But there's one thing, and it does have this phrase on there: let these be guidestones to an age of reason. They're written in Sanskrit, Egyptian, hieroglyphics, Babylonian cuneiform, classical Greek, English. I think the main one that has caused people a lot of concern is that, and this is where the purpose of these things is called into question. Some people will say, "Oh, well, this is just a sort of rules for humanity in the event of a nuclear war." And there's some basis for believing that this was what the purpose of the thing was. But then there's also a reasonable belief, too, that this is laying out what some of the elites would like to have happen in the world. So the first one of these that causes everybody concern, and we should admit it's concern, is it maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. So the question is, are they moving towards that? Now, let's look at some facts. In 1979, the world population was 4,357,000,000 people, give or take, several hundred thousand. In 2022, the world population should reach about 7,910,000,000. Should in 2023, it's supposed to go over 8 billion. And they're saying by 2050, I think it'll be about 10 billion, maybe a little bit more. but also understand, and I'll probably talk a little bit. I talked about this quite a bit on Stand Up for the Truth the other day. There's been a real sea change in um, the demographics of the world. A lot of countries are slowing down in their growth. Now, the United States is kind of hanging in there at about the 2.1 that's necessary for replacement level. The world is still growing because the birth rate is very high, particularly in Africa and parts of Asia. So, but as people move to cities, they have less children. We have China's put in one child policies, enforced them pretty severely, harshly. And eventually people got the message in China. And this started back in the 70s. So in the early 80s, China had pretty much put in place a one child policy. Well, they have a lot of people, but their population has slowed down. There's some indication that the most recent census that came out, the Chinese are sort of now letting people know that, well, maybe we overstated that by about 100 million, and mostly males. So, and because of sex selection and that sort of thing, they now have a huge excess of males, somewhere in the 50 to 120 million dollar dollar 50 to 120 million excess men. That means men who at age of marriage, they have no possibility of having a spouse. That leads to some problems in society. The countries that do that, they have that problem, they may engage in war. And there are some Bible prophecies in Revelation about a 200 million army. And then there's a dispute. Some say it's just demonic. Some say it's really from the kings of the East, which would include China and others. But I can tell you that demographically, most of the studies that I've seen have said that between China and India, within not too many years, they will have 200 million excess males. In India, the abortions have been mainly sex selection. People prefer males as children economically, and so they will abort females. And so they have more males. Well, this has a huge impact. So anyway, so the population is sort of slowing down, but be that as it may, next year we should hit about 8 billion people. So I would just point out that if the goal of the people who put this up was to reduce the population to under 500 million, they've not done a very good job. The population has increased, almost doubled, you could say, in the last 43 years since these things were erected. But nevertheless, I do think it does show that there is a desire of people to reduce the size of the population. And this is one of the things that's been discussed about at the World Economic Forum, is what happens when we get into this highly technical age with artificial intelligence and transhumanism. There's going to be people that, we're going to have machines doing more things, computers doing more things. We won't need as many people. And Yuval Harari, I think I first played him back in 2017 at Davos. At that Davos conference, he was saying, what's it going to mean to be human in the future? But we're going to have a bunch of people who don't even seem to be human any longer, or we don't have a need for them. He's a medieval historian, so his medieval history says, look, he studies the serfs, the lord of the manor, and the serfs that served the lord of the manor. And he said in the Middle Ages, the serfs served a purpose, but now we're going to get to a place where these people, there just won't be any use for them, and what are we going to do? And that leads to a lot of concerns, and I think these are extremely valid concerns that they're going to want to call the herd, so to speak. And part of the way they do that is they do that through abortion. They decrease birth rates. There's a famous quote from Bill Gates about decreasing fertility or slowing population growth down. There's a dispute as to what he said. Essentially, I think what he was saying was, if we get people healthier, they'll have fewer children. So that's why we use the vaccines and everything. They're healthier. They won't have as many children. And over time, that will reduce the population. And nevertheless, this is, this is what's happening. There is being slowing down in the population growth. Now, there's some places where there's still a large population growth, and one of those countries is Turkey, and that's, I think, kind of significant Bible prophecy. So anyway, so here's what happened the other day. There was this is a front page of Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Controversial structure damaged by explosion. And now I'm seeing that I don't have my, so I have to go out of my video. Excuse me. This is what happens when you have to do everything on your own. I'll pick up the other video. Oops. Apologize for the delay here. I think this is the right video. Yes. And so I have to set up playback automatically. Okay, so here's what happened. This was the, here we go. So the other night, night before last, I guess, this hit the news yesterday morning. About 4 a.m. in the morning, there was an explosion at the Guidestones. Now, there's some controversy. Was it somebody planted a bomb? There's the video released by the Georgia Highway Patrol showed that, there was a car leaving the scene around that time. Some have suggested it was a lightning bolt. Certainly, we could understand why there would be a lightning bolt to strike this thing, because I think it's evil. But it destroyed it, one section of it, and it made it unstable. So they had to come in with a big backhoe, and they just knocked the whole thing down. So that's the result. The whole thing is now in rubble. And people are upset about this. It's kind of interesting, the reaction that people have had to this. Got to get here to my, excuse me 1 second. And I'm trying to find I had a great quote out of MSNBC, and apparently I put these in the wrong order. So you're going to get to see all my slides before I get to them. Well, anyway, I don't seem to have that. But there's this great quote that I had from out of MSNBC, not NBC's site, and it said essentially, well, these were just for good things that humanity could accomplish. Well, I don't think reducing the population by a factor of 90% or more, 95% is a good thing. So I don't know anybody that's really upset that these things are gone. These were bad. These were put up by bad people. They're put up by transhumanists, globalists, elitists, whatever you want to call them. And the thing is gone and destroyed now. So, but the question is, what's the impact of that? We can be glad that they're gone. And we can be glad that they're gone, even if we don't agree with the way they went. But, the fact of the matter is, has it changed anything really? I mean, do the people that still hold to these principles, has this caused them to back off in any way? There's even some suggestions that this was a false flag because it was done, and now they're going to be able to blame the people that they, wanted, all of us who they want to charge with misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation and that type of thing. So it's hard to say. Anyway, so here's a couple other things. I just want to do a couple economic things. So here is a chart that I think I discussed this a little bit on Sunday. I may have discussed it with David Fiorazo. Sometimes I don't even remember what I talk about, to be honest with you. But from Bloomberg, and what it shows is that it shows this price for electricity on forward-looking contracts, like contracts that are going to be fulfilled. 1 year forward electricity prices have now surged to an all-time high. And they were about, let's use the unit 50 euros. They're now 250 euros per megawatt hour. That's an increase of 5. Now, Biden administration and all the EU leaders want you to believe that these prices are increasing because of the war in Ukraine. But if you look very carefully at the Ukraine war, it was in February. And what you see is that the price hikes had pretty much set in at least by a factor of four. They'd gone up by 4 times what they were before the war in Ukraine. And I think, as we'll see, I was looking at some other charts about gasoline prices in the United States. Those prices had increased dramatically from the beginning of really from the election in 2020 until before the war in Ukraine. They had gone up quite a bit. And part of that was because they were decreasing supplies. Now, there's other pressures. We know there's a lot of, I won't get too much into the food situation, but this is reaching or will reach the point of being very dire. I played a quote from Peter Zeihan, Zeihan. You can check out his YouTube channel, Geo Now, I think it's called. He's a geopolitical guy, and he's optimistic. He thinks everything's going to eventually turn around and come back, but it might take 30 or 40 years. And he thinks the U.S. will eventually be okay, and that's partly because of our resources and that sort of thing. And I would agree that, if you were just thinking through it from a practical standpoint, that might be the case, but seem to be in this end time period where things are happening quickly. They're converging, and I don't know that they're going to come back. Well, now here's this protest that's going on in the Netherlands right now with farmers. And what they've done is they've tried to cut back on farmers. They've put in restrictions, and the response of the Netherlands government, who are controlled by the Davos crowd, just like Canada is controlled by the Davos crowd. They want to, they're concerned about green energy, and farming's viewed as a environmental problem. And so the elites don't really, they're either doing this intentionally to try to get rid of people, or they're not thinking it through. And people don't live if they don't eat. So there are protests. They've essentially tried to cut the farming back by about a third in the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is a pretty strong agricultural country. The farmers do a great job there. They have good yields and that type of thing. And the response of one of the people in the government was, hey, if you guys can't farm anymore, that's too bad. We're going to cut you off. And you'll have to go do something else. Go to art museums during the day or something like that instead of farming. And this will have a ripple effect through the economy. So Peter's on, and I think in a clip I played on Sunday, he said, look, looking at things realistically, because of the war in Ukraine and other things that were going on, and even I think I played a clip of somebody from the UN who said that there were agricultural problems in a lot of places. The Western U.S. is in a major drought, particularly in the Southwest, from Western Kansas to the West. We saw this, PM and I, when we were out West last summer, we saw Western Kansas was it looked awful, because you hear all these stories all your life about the great wheat fields and other agriculture in Western Kansas. It just didn't look that good. And Eastern Colorado, between the Kansas border and Denver, was devastating. I mean, it was so bad it looked like why would they even bother to harvest this corn? It's the worst corn crops I'd ever seen in my life because they've had a major drought, and they're still in the midst of a major drought. And this is impacting a lot of our food growing regions. So Peter's on, he said, look, this year it looks like we're going to have a 500 million people, 500 million people in the world will be in or on the verge of severe famine. And that next year, given the way things are going, adding in the war in Ukraine, which is locking up, a lot of the wheat, slowing down productions, and then people are stopping exports, that's going to be a major issue. And the number of people in famine or on the verge of famine will grow from 500 million to 1.5 billion next year. It'll triple. And that's going to ripple through a lot of different industries. I hear a lot of things about diesel shortages. I know that there's some concerns about Cushing, Oklahoma. I remember Cushing, Oklahoma a year ago, they had so much oil they wouldn't take anymore, and that was causing the price of oil to drop. People were trying to use the pipelines as storage facilities. That had a ripple effect. So the price of oil actually for a short time went negative. In other words, they would theoretically pay people to take the oil off of their hands. Now Cushing is, the storage in Cushing is dropping very quickly. And that's not good. So there was a good, you could go to Rumble or warroom.org, and Michael Jan was in the Netherlands. And here's the tweet that he had. He did an interview with Steve Bannon. I feel that pre-war feel, almost smell it in the air, getting serious over here. I'm sensing arson and gunshot deaths in the future. Chances of this ending badly in the Netherlands, thus for world food supply, thus accelerating famine, is greater than 90%. And Michael Jan's a great journalist, and he goes around. So you have this food issue that I just don't see any way that it doesn't get worse. Now, in the United States, a lot of farmers have planted. They planted late. Some of them are not using what they call inputs like fertilizer and that sort of thing like they've used before. And that will have an impact on yields. Probably not as much this year as it would next year. So if this thing continues and next year they don't have the inputs and fertilizer, I've talked to a couple farmers and they just say, we don't know what we're going to do. We don't know if we're going to continue to hang in there and continue to do this because it's incredibly expensive. And whatever risk there has always been in farming, a bad weather year can really sink your farm. I mean, I did some farm bankruptcy work, and part of that was due to the extremely wet season we had in Ohio, I think about 4 years ago now. And it was so wet that about 50% of the farmland in Ohio did not really get planted that year. And that did get planted just didn't do that well because the ground was so wet over much of the state. And we drove around. I had to go up to northern Ohio a number of times, northwest Ohio, which is heavy agriculture. And it was devastating. It just looked awful. So this year maybe won't have a huge impact on the yields, but then you have the problem of what's the diesel situation going to be, because you have to have the diesel fuel to get the stuff out of the field. If it's corn and if it gets wet, you have to have dryers to dry the corn, because it affects the value of the corn if it's too wet and the sugar that it produces. And if you don't have the natural gas to run the dryers, it's just like this cascade of problems. And I think we're in this cascade of problems. A guy that I watch occasionally, a guy named Chris Martinson at Peak Prosperity, I think he's a very level-headed guy. And he was doing an interview with his wife last week. I played a little bit of it last Sunday. And he was just saying, I feel like every time I turn my head to look at another screen or another tab on my computer, it's another thing going wrong. And he says, after a couple of these, I have trouble wrapping my head around it. And then I see 5, 6, 7, 8 things like this in the course of a day. So he's the one who brought out that chart that I showed you at the beginning, this chart that showed that the price of electricity is going up. Natural gas is going up. Everything is going up. There's inflation, and there's inflation pretty much anywhere. There are countries in the world that are in really almost a state of anarchy right now. Sri Lanka, I've seen videos of people chasing other people, elites on the street, and beating them to death. I see police firing on people. They're having riots in Sri Lanka. I know that Ecuador is very is very tenuous right now in terms of the situation getting out of hand. I'm hearing things about Argentina and Brazil are also in potentially major problems. It's just, and it's everywhere. And I wish I had better news. I always get accused of being too negative, and I'm just say, well, I'm positive that it's bad out there. So let's just leave it at that. Now, here's an interesting story. This came from Reuters. Now, Reuters is not a conservative news publication, but they reported yesterday that during this time, you remember Biden came out a couple months ago and he said, well, we're going to take oil out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the SPR, and we're going to use that to control prices. Well, they haven't been doing that. And now it's coming out. This is from Reuters. They looked at the shipping manifest and that type of thing, and they found out that 5 million barrels of this oil, there's, I think, about 600 million barrels in the reserve, but at least 5 million of it was sent overseas to Europe and Asia, to India, to China, and to other countries. Like 15% of it that went to China, which is not really China's not America's friend right now. And I think this is just a horrible thing. So here's what the Reuters article said: about 1 million barrels per day is being released from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve through October. The flow is draining the SPR, which last month fell to the lowest since 1986. So if we get into a war situation, that's why we have this SPR, is to protect us in the event that we end up in a war. And we're kind of in a war right now, but now the Biden administration is just shipping it overseas. I saw a reporter asked the White House press secretary yesterday, what about this? She said, well, I'm not aware of this. I mean, everything that she never has an answer for anything, because there is no answer for this, because what you're doing is really bad. And this is bad. So there was an interview, it was about 6 days ago, on CNN with one of the White House economic advisors. He used to work for BlackRock, which is one of the companies pushing the ESG, which is causing people to back off of oil production and everything. And I want you to just listen to what he says when he's asked by CNN, hey, people are upset about paying high prices. What do you have to say to that? And let me see if I can get this to play.
National intelligence, they said that this could be a long war measured in years. And I think everybody understands why this is happening. But is it sustainable? What do you say to those families who say, listen, we can't afford to pay $4.85 a gallon for months, if not years. This is just not sustainable.
Well, what you heard from the president today was a clear articulation of the stakes. This is about the future of the liberal world order, and we have to stand firm. But at the same time, what I'd say to that family and to Americans across the country is you have a president and administration that is going to do everything in its power to blunt those price increases and bring those prices down. Good news, over the last 2 weeks, we've seen the price of gas at the pump come down about 20 cents, but still unacceptably high. That's why the president, before he was at NATO in the G7 earlier this week, was working to bring the G7 allies together around exploring something around a price cap to cap the price that can be paid for Russian oil, which will actually target the pain more directly on Vladimir Putin.
National intelligence.
So that just shows the insanity of what's going on with people. That it's either they don't know what they're doing or they're doing it intentionally. I lean to the fact that they're doing this intentionally. And so going to Putin, who's the war's going okay for Russia now. They're taking back some territory. I don't think they've done as great as they thought they were going to do. I think that in the event that this thing drug out for a long time, they're eventually going to do whatever they want with Ukraine. And the Russian machine has been their war strategy, their war doctrine is sort of obliteration. So they're going in and they're just obliterating cities, or they're doing strategic strikes, like they hit a shopping mall with a rock, a couple shopping centers, and it's to get people. It's a sense of terrorism. They're going to make them leave. It's very similar to what happened in Syria, where these cities that were largely Sunni were bombed to obliteration. You've seen the video. I played the videos over and over and over again. And that's consistent with the Russian war doctrine and so they're going to do that. And they have tons and tons and tons of artillery, way more than Ukraine has. But it's been difficult for them. I mean, I think they're taking a break right now. They said they're sending their soldiers back for some, or pulling them back so they could rest and recover, so they could go on. So, that war is going to go on for a while, and it's going to have ripple effects on a whole bunch of things. And there's a lot of concern. There's a lot of wheat locked up in Ukraine right now. And who knows what happened with the crop for this year. And there's grains and sunflower seeds and oil and that type of thing that come out of Ukraine. And they're not coming because the port of Odessa, where they would leave to get into the Black Sea, is closed and it's mined. I just don't see anything happening. They can't really do it by rail or shipping by truck because of the war situation. So it's just whatever Ukraine did. Ukraine provides enough food to feed about 400 million people around the world each year. I mean, it's a significant amount of the world's population. And you take that out, you add in drought here, you add in cutting back, disincentivizing farming in the Netherlands and elsewhere. And it's pretty clear that there's a major problem. Now, here's a non-economic thing that happened, though, that's very significant. So about a week ago at the G7 meeting, there was a discussion that came out between Macron and Boris Johnson. And that discussion essentially said that they wanted to look into reviving a Roman Empire of some kind. And now we hear today, over the past couple of days, a huge number of ministers had resigned from the British cabinet. And they told Boris Johnson to resign. And that number, you can see this little chart in the middle of my slide here at the bottom. This peak right here, that is the number that have resigned under Boris Johnson. It was like 40. And it shows other people like, under Thatcher before she resigned as prime minister, and others who've resigned as prime minister, it was significantly less. People lose confidence in the government. And so this morning, Boris Johnson came out at number 10 Downing Street and issued a statement that he is resigning as the prime minister of the UK. That means they're going to have to go to elections, just like the government failed in Israel. Now Yair Lapid in Israel is the caretaker prime minister. I don't think he's the type of person that is very good for Israel. That's my opinion. And so he's the caretaker until the elections take place on November 1st. And there's some indications in the polling in Israel that the most popular person might be Netanyahu, but whether anyone can form a long-term government is quite questionable. So here's a little thing: Klaus Schwab, the puppet master, and Johnson going down with the ship. So it's just everything's in turmoil. They're having rail strike in the UK that's causing problems. They have the British Airways canceled another 10,000 flights. These flights are being canceled. There are hundreds and hundreds of flights being canceled in the United States each weekend, maybe thousands over the course of a week. Here's some good news, though. Maya Forrester, who was fired from her job, she got a good court decision. She was fired her job because she said something like, men are men and women are women. And women get pregnant. The only people who get pregnant are women. There was a guy, I saw him on Fox, I think it was on Tucker Carlson last night. He was an editor, journalist at USA Today, and he said that, he tweeted that the only pregnant people are women. And he got demoted and eventually left, and only one person at USA Today supported him because of this woke thing. So that causes chaos in the workplace. And then we have the travel chaos that's going on pretty much everywhere. It's and at the same time we have increase in the cases of coronavirus. So now let me talk. I think this is about the last thing I'm going to talk about, because this relates to the gas supply. So the word was, by the way, I played that little clip where they wanted to put a cap on the price that people could pay Russia. Now, this is insanity, because Putin doesn't have to agree to that. And he's got enough gas and he's got enough revenue coming in from other sources that I don't think he needs it. So what, gas and oil. And so what JP Morgan did, they sort of ran the numbers. I don't know if it's might have been the brokerage firm Morgan. They did the sort of a calculation about what could happen to the price of oil if this cap goes in place and Russia just says, we're not going to sell oil to anybody. You guys can, do whatever you want, but I'm not selling you any. Their conclusion was, now in a worst case scenario, was that the price of oil could go, it's roughly around $100 a barrel right now, that the price of oil, and I think JP Morgan Chase actually had come out, the bank, and come out and said that they thought that the price of oil could go to $184 a barrel. So factor that in. If it's $100 a barrel now, what are you going to be paying for gas if it goes to $184 a barrel? But the analysis that they did on Russia just shutting everything down and not selling oil was that the price of oil worldwide would go to $384 a barrel. If that happens, everything collapses. I just don't know how you can get about that. So Europe is in a problem. Even a recent report from Bloomberg said that the price of natural gas in Europe is up 700% from what it was last year. That's a huge increase. I mean, and how are people going to afford that? And then you have this cascade effect again. You have, they need electricity is generated by burning natural gas in large part. Germany shut down most of their nuclear. They used to have 15 or 20 nuclear power plants. They're down now down to 5. They're buying electricity from France, which still maintains its nuclear power. And people say, well, we'll just build a nuclear power plant. But in today's environment, it's hard to do. There's I believe it is in France, a new nuclear power plant that's supposed to come online pretty soon. That power plant has been under construction for 17 years. Of course, all those price increases and delays and everything get passed on to the customers. And I think one of the French entities involved in nuclear power has just gone bankrupt and the government's taking it over. It's not a good situation. So on the gas situation, what the EU is doing is they're looking at getting alternative supplies for gas. One of the places that they're getting gas because they're not getting it from Russia. And Russia has slowed down the flow of gas. Now it's not winter, so it's not a big a deal as it would be in the middle of a very cold winter in Europe, which is pretty far north. And then there's a dispute as to why is Russia slowing it down. Russia says, well, we need some maintenance items that are stuck in Canada because of the sanctions that you put in, and we can't get this thing replaced. And that may very well be true. And it may be that they're cutting back on the supplies to squeeze Europe. And they don't want Europe interfering in what they want to do in Ukraine. So could be one or the other, could be a combination of them. Nevertheless, the problem is that, and then coming in about 2 weeks, the Nord Stream 1, which is the main pipeline now that supplies gas to the EU, is going to be shut down for at least a couple of weeks, I believe, for maintenance. So that causes yet another problem. What are they going to do for gas in the meantime? So there are a couple alternatives: is you pipe in gas from other places. The problem is that, the other places that have gas don't have the gas to supply. The other way is to liquefy the natural gas, put it on a ship, and ship it to Europe. That's already done in large part by Qatar. That's how a lot of their gas gets to Europe. But they have contracts, so they just can't increase the flow, and they only have a certain capacity in their LNG plants to do that. Another place is the United States. We have about 5 facilities in the United States that can do this, but one of them is currently offline because of that fire. I talked about that a couple of weeks ago down around Houston, and it may not come back online until October, November, which means that, now you're getting dangerously close to winter, cold period where the EU needs the gas, the supply is low, the price is going to go up. It's just inevitable that it's going to go up. So the EU came to Israel. Israel has a fair amount of gas in these fields. So you see Israel here in the dark brown, and to the north is Lebanon. So the red areas are gas fields. Now there's a gas field called Aphrodite that really belongs to Cyprus, but that's leading to a lot of tensions between Turkey and Cyprus. Turkey controls about 40% of the landmass of Cyprus. They claim it as their sovereign territory. And then they say, well, we need to be involved in all the gas decisions. You see a lot of gas fields there down along the coast of Egypt. In Egypt, but Egypt doesn't really have a lot of excess gas to sell because they have a big population and they need it for their own uses. And understand, too, that natural gas is also important in the development of fertilizer. So that leads to problems in that particular area. What you have is, might have been Chris Martenson or Peter Zahn who said this, is what you have here is the world is a very complex system and it's breaking down. And it is breaking down. It is the acceleration of disruption, I guess you could call this. So in these gas fields, Israel has Leviathan, Tannin, Tamar, a couple others, and they've now started developing a field called Karish. Now, Israel and Lebanon have been involved for quite a long time in a maritime border dispute. There is a treaty on the law of the seas, but neither Israel nor Lebanon nor Turkey, I think, have signed that agreement. So it makes it very difficult when they're not a signatory to that treaty. How are you going to determine what the maritime border is? So here's a little bit better graphic. You see Lebanon there on the right, Israel, and so you see there's been in the dispute, and it goes to arbitration, and there's a guy named Amos Hochstein who's been involved with the U.S. and another guy named Hoff who was involved for a while in trying to resolve this dispute. So people submit their, we want this. Israel says we want this, and then if they can't agree on it, it's arbitrated, mediated, and they come to a resolution. But this has not come to a resolution. So originally Israel came and they've said line 1 that you see on the screen there is that's the line we think the way the border should operate. And that's pretty close to what international law would determine. But the problem was they found this big, long red field that you see here, gas field. And so Lebanon came out and said, we want line 23. That's where it should go. So most of that gas that comes out of that field there, I can't remember the name of it, is that should belong to us. The guy named Hoff came in with the middle line. He did proposed a compromise, where most of that would go to Lebanon and some to Israel. That's the whole situation is further complicated by the fact that last year Israel discovered gas in the Karish field here next to this big energy and ship drilling ship that, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. And of course, Lebanon, they have no money. They're bankrupt. Their government's not controlling. And it's complete chaos. You had that big explosion just about 2 years ago in the grain silos where a lot of the country's grain was stored there in the port of Beirut. And that was destroyed. And so now the country, now they have a food problem. Now they have a power problem. They have this, they have no money. Their inflation is crazy. Hezbollah controls a large portion of the country, effectively controls the army. And so when the Karish field was discovered, Hezbollah goes, hey, that's part of our field. In fact, we want this new line 29. The problem is they've never really submitted that formally anything. But June 9th, Nasrallah got on Lebanon TV, as he's prone to do about 3 times a week, and makes this 2-hour speech / rant and says, we're not going to let Israel drill there. We're not going to do that. And so we want part of that Karish field. And so you might remember this giant drilling ship, the Karish Energy and Karish ship was taken through the Suez Canal and brought and put in place. This was back about a month ago. And this is when Nasrallah said, don't you dare start drilling with that ship. And so the paper on the left is from a few weeks back. Paper on the right is a current issue this week of Al Akbar. That's a Lebanese newspaper. I try to read it every day. It's essentially a mouthpiece for Hezbollah, which is the terrorist organization that is effectively in control of the government, even after the elections and they lost some of their seats. Hezbollah still really is calling the shots and they control this. So they said, listen, we're not going to allow Israel to drill. And so what they did was about a week ago, last weekend, they sent 3 drones from Lebanon. They were unarmed out towards this ship, this drilling rig that's now moored off about 40 miles off the coast of Israel. And they even put up a video and they said, oh, this is a picture of a drone video that we took. And it had crosshairs and everything. And it was a totally fake, made up propaganda piece. It was just, they took an old video of some drone footage that Energean, the company that owns the ship or leases it to Israel, they took the video and they made it up. It was just totally fake propaganda piece. So, and then Nasrallah, and then people are saying, well, Nasrallah wasn't really that mean to Israel. He was just sort of giving Hezbollah's position. That I think that was a bunch of baloney. He was saying, look, Israel, we're going to attack you. And they sent these drones out. Israel scrambled some F-16s, and they also have a missile boat, and they took out the drones. And now it's been revealed that a little while back, there was yet another drone that Israel took out. Now, they were unarmed. And of course, Hezbollah says the operation was a complete success. We made the enemy respond, and we learned how they respond, and et cetera. It's all propaganda. But it is a potential issue. So the EU comes to Israel and says, we need gas to replace what we get from Russia. Now, Israel, so I've tried to pull this out. I think I've got this pretty accurate. For example, if you look at Russian gas reserves, by most estimates, they have 1,688 trillion cubic feet. They have enough gas for well over 100 years at current usage rates. They're the largest natural gas reserves in the world. I think the next largest are Iran and Qatar. They have the largest single field in the world is the South Pars field in the Persian Gulf. And that's where Qatar gets its gas. And I think they just found another gas field there that's going to be split. I think it's 80% Qatar, 20% Iran. And Qatar is a big supplier of liquefied natural gas, LNG. They have facilities there, but they're, like I said, they have contracts with everybody, so they don't have excess capacity. So Russia has this huge amount of gas. Now, as best as I could determine from the research that I've been doing, is that the Eastern Mediterranean, that includes Israel, Cyprus, Egypt, and Lebanon, and Gaza. There's some gas reserves off of Gaza. That total gas reserves there is about 122 trillion cubic feet. So you can see it's about what Russia has is about 14 times the amount of gas that the East Med has in all the combined resources. But now Israel has gas reserves of that 122 trillion cubic feet. They have about 40 trillion. And I changed that to 40,000 billion to show you that they really could supply a lot of gas to Europe. Europe imports from Russia about 185 billion cubic feet of gas per year. Israel has 40,000. So they could do that. And you can see how it's divided between these fields. And some of them are in production yet. Some of them are still being developed. But Israel has a lot of gas. And they also have a lot of oil, but I'm just talking about gas right now. So Europe has come to Israel and said, we want your gas. They entered into a memorandum of understanding. It's not a final agreement. And there's two ways to get it there. There's a pipeline and there is a liquefied natural gas by ship. So the problem is that neither one, the infrastructure is not there for either one of those to get much gas to Europe right now. Like last year, Amos Hochstein, the State Department person in charge of energy, Middle East energy policy for the United States, did an interview with TRT World in Turkey. I've played you some clips of that. And they said, the U.S. came out and said, we're not in support of a pipeline because it'll take 5 years at least to build. It'll cost $10 billion. And we don't see in the future that we're going to be using fossil fuels. This is the other insanity of the left and the Greens that are in control of our government, that they think we're going to get rid of this stuff. Victoria Nuland, you know her name. She was involved in a lot of stuff in Ukraine and elsewhere. Not really a good person. She came to the Middle East or Eastern Mediterranean in April, and she said essentially the same thing: is we don't want to do a pipeline because that's just too permanent. But we could see doing LNG facilities and build those for the transition period before we go to, I guess, solar panels and that type of thing, which is, I hate to use something could be a pun, but it's a pipe dream. It's not going to happen because there's all these developing countries. They want to use electricity and that type of thing. They want air conditioning. They want the benefits of this. And so this whole green thing is just total, complete nonsense and insanity. But it's being used by the elites to control everything. That's clear. So anyway, so Nuland says, well, we just think it's too costly and it's not going to be online to get gas to Europe that quickly. And it's only going to be transition phase. And we could see doing that over the next 10 years. So it's kind of interesting on the timing here because the infrastructure is not there. And there's always this controversy about what is the hook in the jaw that causes these northern invasion to come down to Israel to take spoil. Is that gas? It could very well be gas and oil. I'm not thoroughly convinced that it is, but yeah, there's a reasonably thought out scenario where it is the way that things might develop. But you got to get the infrastructure in place. So I always talk about logistics. So you got to get the infrastructure in place for Israel to get the gas to Europe. And right now, it looks like the only way that that's going to be done is through liquefied natural gas. And it's more expensive to do that. It costs about to cool it to like, I don't know how many 100 degrees below zero to liquefy it, get it in heavily insulated ships, take it across the ocean, and then reverse that process at the other end. It's at least $10. I'll use the barrel equivalent. It's like $10 a barrel to get that done. It adds to the cost, but it's still better than no gas at all. So we'll see. I have to watch this. But understand, too, that this is leading to a lot of tension between Hezbollah and its Iran masters. Hezbollah is a proxy for Iran and Israel. And so Israel's sort of on high alert for potential wars. And understand, too, that the drones being launched from Lebanon out towards this this ship in the Karish field, that was done at the direction of Iran. There's no question about that. So I'll talk more Sunday about there's a lot of things going on in the developing tension between Israel and Iran. And some of the intel people that I follow are saying that people in Israel, some people in the military are saying that they feel that they're very close to a major confrontation on multiple fronts with the enemies of Israel. So it's all very dicey. And you got Biden going there in a couple weeks. We got the Israeli government is in a caretaker government right now. The Abraham Accords, Jared Kushner's been over there pushing everything. It's just, there's a lot of things going on, and we'll talk more about that on Sunday. So I just want to talk about one more thing that I think is kind of significant. Now, this I got from The Drive. It's a tweet that The Drive put up, and I'll just read the headline. Turkey's newfound cache of rare earths could supply the world's EVs, electric vehicles, and more. A new rare earth deposit in Turkey rivals the size of China's and could supply the entire world for decades. Now, this is a very significant development if this is true. I'm not sure. I'm not entirely convinced that this is true, that Erdogan is running for a re-election in 2023. Inflation is out of control in Turkey, but he has a way of like always landing on his feet and doing things. And so this very well might be true. This would be a big game changer because now China controls this, and have somebody in competition would be good for the world, except that it's an Islamist country run by Erdogan, and he has other designs about reviving the Ottoman Empire. But for many years, I think I've told you this, my friend Chuck Missler and I had a conversation many years ago. And I said, Chuck, are you excited about the end times? And he said, yeah, but what I'm really watching, John, is Turkey. Because I think Turkey is very significant. And I think with the prophecies of the location of these countries, these groups identified in Ezekiel 38:39, Turkey is very significant in that. Some say that Turkey really is the lead. It's the Magog part of that coalition that comes against Israel. Others make it Russia. And I'm sort of the mind that we'll see when it happens. And that, again, depends on when this Gog-Magog war of Ezekiel 38 and 39 happens. And there's a lot of different opinions on that. And again, it's one of these things I think we'll see. And we can have fun arguing about it and until it happens. But this is very significant. And Turkey is also one of the countries demographically that is in a very good demographic position, and that it's producing a lot of people. Outside of the United States, in NATO, they have the largest army. So they are a significant power. And they are also talking about going into northern Syria. They're not happy with the way things are going. that causes tension between them and Russia. Russia has put about 500 paratroopers in to northeast Syria the other day. There's a tension now about this one border crossing that would be west of Aleppo at the Turkish border. It's really the only border crossing. There used to be a few to get food to the refugee groups and the people in Turkey and supply food for millions of Syrians. But now Russia is not agreeing to the opening of this border crossing. Russia said they would handle it, but they were bringing across like 800 trucks or convoys of food over the course of a year. Since Russia's kind of got intervened a bit, best I can understand is that number's dropped to 5 trucks. Well, that's not going to help people. Now, Syria doesn't want to give these people food because a lot of these are rebel groups that are still fighting the Syrian government. And this is another hot area. And then Turkey is saying, we want to take over this border area, move down. This has been long a goal of Erdogan because he doesn't like the Kurds and he considers all of them to be terrorists. So this is supposed to be up for a vote and argument today at the Security Council about this border crossing in northwest Syria. So a lot of things going on, a lot of potential tensions. But the food situation, the fuel situation, gas, oil, inflation. This could really bother you if you let it. But we're not given the spirit of fear. But we also have to deal with the reality that we live in. It's interesting to me. Sometimes PM was mentioning she was talking to somebody about all the things that are going on, and the lady goes, "What are you talking about? Everything's fine. It's great." And so you hear this from our government. They're saying, the Biden regime, the president is doing such a wonderful job. And it's just insane. And that's the world we're going to live in. I don't see it changing until the Lord returns. But we'll see. Nevertheless, we're supposed to do what we're supposed to do, act like men, share the gospel. And I think you need to prepare. I do not know. I just think you need to act wisely. So anyway, that's a little relatively short update for me. And I'll talk to you more on Sunday. Thanks for listening.